Okay, I think we're going to get started. So the biggest question that we get at these usually, and not always, but we also get it in our office, and I hear it all over, which is how I'm going to grow my business. How do I do a business plan? How do I value my company? How do I value my company in the middle of growth? And how do I raise that capital? And somebody asked, is this kind of for beginners or people who haven't really gotten started? But the truth is that for growing your business, there are going to be many, many intervals where you make decisions about funding. There are many intervals where you make decision about, property you acquire or equipment you acquire or how you grow in terms of employees or location or places that your product is. And those are all ongoing business decisions. And so I reached out to the Oregon Entrepreneurs Network, who I've spoken for a couple of occasions and are a really, really fantastic traditional business group who work with entrepreneurs. And so I connected with OEN and I asked them who they would recommend to come talk to everybody. And they recommended Steve Morris. He is here today. He is going to talk. We have some handouts. That is a first for the Oregon Cannabis Association. Real handouts. So I have some handouts. We'll pass those around. And he is going to talk about real business planning. And then we have Matt Wallstetter, who a lot of you probably know from Pure Green. And he has done a number of business plans. And he is going to talk about his personal experience doing that. And then at the end, we have Marco, who is a securities attorney, among other things. And he is going to talk about how to raise money. So there are securities laws, and if you violate them, you might go to prison, just like for selling weed across state lines. So he's going to talk a little bit about how to ask for that money, how to do it right, how to do it safely, and some of the more important securities pieces. So I'd like to start with Steve Morris. We should give him a big welcome. It's very nice to have him.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Amy wouldn't let me use slides, so I had to have handouts, or then I wouldn't have any. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today. My quick background on me, I manage an incubator for tech startups out in Beaverton. Do a lot of work with the OEM and all kinds of companies, all kinds of startups. A lot of work in rural Oregon. And even further back, I'm a native Oregonian, born in Hood River, grade school and high school in Pendleton, which is about as redneck as you can get in Oregon. And to broaden my mind, I then, after Pendleton High School, went to college at Reed. I still have the scars, I'm sure, but I adapted. I even got used to Portland rain, which I didn't think I would. But anyway, so that's my quick background, and I've done a few startups too. What I'd like to talk about today is this is sort of a mini version of a workshop we do on trying to validate business models. I always encourage entrepreneurs to not just sit down and write a business plan, because you don't know enough, typically, to sit down and write a business plan right at the beginning. And it just becomes an interesting work of fiction, and that doesn't do you much good. So the key thing to do is to focus in on your business model first. And basically, the idea is to write down what you believe and then test it. It's the old scientific method approach to starting a business. And that's a real common approach these days that startup mentors recommend. And Amy's going to hand out some handouts here that have, amongst other things, this one-page business model canvas. And I would encourage you all to fill one out. I'm going to basically walk through it today and talk about different pieces of it. But again, the basic idea is we see way too many entrepreneurs, whether it's tech, non-tech, whatever, just jump in and start delivering a product or a service, assuming, amongst other things, that they can make enough revenue to pay their costs, and assuming, amongst other things, that the way they think about the business is, of course, the way their target customers think about the business. And that's almost always wrong. I like to tell entrepreneurs that the fact that you're crazy enough to start a company means you're weird. And to think that you think the same way as your customer is usually a big mistake. So again, what's better to do is write down what you believe and go test it. And that's what this one-page canvas is simply a tool that helps you do. It's not that complicated. It's one page. It has 9 boxes on it. And in those boxes, the idea is you write down the critical assumptions or hypotheses, if you want to think scientifically, that have to be true for your business to be successful. And then you go test those. And by the time you get done testing those, you're actually in pretty good shape to write a business plan that's got at least a better chance of not being a work of fiction. So that's the approach. And what I want to do is kind of walk through this. And I'd actually encourage you to jot down some notes in the right section of each of your canvas, because this is not a process that takes days or weeks or months. You can fill out a canvas in an hour. You know, it's not meant to be that hard. Just write down what you believe and then go test it. And it starts, when you get your canvas, you'll see there's a box on the right that talks about your market and your market segment, and a box on the far left that talks about the unmet need or the problem or the opportunity in the market. Well, those are all assumptions that you're making. And I want to talk about what those mean. But first, I need to talk about milkshakes, because it's actually a pretty good example. If you have this first handout that's a bunch of slides that has the big red test button on it, down on the second row you'll see the Innovator's Dilemma, book by Clayton Christensen. Really interesting read all by itself. But he's got in the book the milkshake example. It's a good example of figuring out your market segment and the unmet need. And it's a good example that shows how these things are often more complicated than you thought. This was a case of a fast food restaurant. They're trying to figure out how to sell more milkshakes. And so they brought in an academic research team that did something a little different than the market research consultant they brought in before. They used the Clayton Christensen approach, which is to say, think in terms of what is your customer hiring your product or hiring your service to do, right? What job is your customer hiring your product or service to do? Because that's why people buy, right? They buy a thing because of what it's going to do for them. And so they took that approach talking to people buying something as mundane as milkshakes. And it turns out half the milkshakes, fully half of them, were bought in the morning. Why would somebody buy a milkshake in the morning? Seems like a pretty lousy breakfast. Well, it turns out they talked to some of the customers that did that, and what they found was they bought, usually, the morning buyers were commuters. They wanted to have something to eat that would fill them up so they weren't starving by 10 o'clock. That was one goal. Another goal was they typically had kind of a long commute. They wanted something big and thick that would last through the whole commute so they wouldn't be bored. And they had tried other things like, bagels, and bagels got crumbs all over the car. That didn't work. Egg McMuffins gets crumbs plus grease on your tie. That didn't work. Milkshakes were great because they don't spill crumbs. They're easy to eat, and if they're really thick, then they take a long time, and that was great. Lasts through the whole drive. I know you're asking, what the hell does this got to do with cannabis? But we'll get there. Okay, now, a lot of them got bought in the afternoon, and they figured out that a lot of those were also bought by adults, but for their kids, that they brought in for lunch. A small milkshake was an easy yes to the kids. I want something sweet, So, okay, that was fine. But they had a completely different set of needs. They wanted something not too big, because they didn't want to fill the kid completely up with sugar. They wanted something that actually wasn't too thick, because they didn't want to take too long to eat it. They actually wanted to finish up and get the heck out of there. So here was, actually it's a great example of market segmentation. The buyers in the morning, totally different market segment. Yeah, they happen to be adults, but they're buying a product for totally different reasons. It's a frickin' milkshake, right? But it's a totally different product. It's big and it's thick, and bought to do an entirely different job than the people that walked in at lunch with their kids that wanted something small and not too thick and would, satisfy the kids with an easy yes and get them out of there quickly. So I like that example because it's a great example of market segmentation and a great example of how different customers in your market can absolutely be hiring your product or service for different jobs. And that's what you need to understand. And usually, when you're first starting out, it's a really good idea to pick one. For all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is that it's hard to market more than one message clearly when you're a new company with limited resources. You don't have an unlimited marketing budget. So that takes us back finally to the canvas, which is, again, the first two things you fill out are the block on the right that says market. What are the market segments in your market, and which one are you going to tackle? I guarantee you, however you're thinking about cannabis, there absolutely are multiple market segments. And if you just try to peanut butter across it and go for everything, it's not a good sign. I mean, focus, even though focus, it's not intuitive because, oh God, if I focus, I'm leaving money on the table. There are these people, and there's these people, and there's these people, and if I just focus on these people, I can't sell to everybody else. But, you know, the reality is, and I think you've heard about branding earlier, right? If you have a mushy branding message, what happens is you don't end up selling much to anybody, as opposed to having a really clear message. And that's where brand links right into focusing on a market segment. So it's a really good idea to focus on the market segment, and then you can flip over to the other side of the canvas and talk about the unmet need. You can't really, again, milkshake, great example. You can't talk about the job being done, the unmet need, until you choose a segment. Because clearly, the commuter in the morning versus the parent at lunch were two different markets with different unmet needs. So, I guarantee you this is true for your business too, wherever you are in the value chain. It's a really good idea to pick the segment. And frankly, I mean, you can study it forever. This is the other classic challenge an entrepreneur has is, well, how do I choose? There are all these different segments. You know, you write down what's important, and you just make a choice. Maybe it's the one that's the easiest to make product, or it's a market that's easier to get to. It's a really well-defined demographic. Or it's a market that has a stronger need. They'll buy sooner or pay more, whatever. But, you know, you decide. You take your best bet, and you go for it. Because, again, I would argue focus is always better than not. So that's the first couple of segments in the canvas. And that then leads to the next one right next to the unmet need is, okay, then what's your solution? After you've really nailed and understand what you think the segment is and the unmet need, okay, then clearly that's going to have some influence on what the right solution is. And on the very next one, which is, what is your differentiated value add? Right? You're going to be competing with a lot of people. What is it that's going to make you different in a way that customers actually care about? A lot of ways to be different in ways that customers don't give a damn about, and that doesn't help either. So how are you going to be different in a way that customers care about? Now, those are some critical assumptions. So the idea here is write those things down and then go test them. How do you test them? You test them by radical notion for the technical entrepreneurs I work with who would rather write code than talk to people, right? You got to go talk to people. And frankly, early on in your entrepreneur efforts, this is not a, send out a survey monkey survey to a bunch of people. Because you actually want to sit down and talk to people. These are probing discussions. You're actually trying to understand, okay, I think X is the job, quote unquote, that you're hiring this product to do. Am I right? Or did I totally miss the mark? And you're really trying to, and by the way, the hard part about this sort of research is that people tend to be nice. And people will agree with you and tell you you have a great idea. And it turns out they're not your customer, they would never buy anything from you, and their feedback is totally worthless, right? Because they don't know what they're talking about. They're not in your market segment. And that's the thing you have to be careful with when you're validating your market, is you're talking to customers, you're trying to figure out, am I right about, let's say I'm gonna target boomers, because boomers have XYZ need. And it's a really good idea, especially if you're not a boomer. But even if you are a boomer, you're only a sample of one, right? So don't assume that you understand all boomers, even if you are a boomer. The idea is you're probing, you're asking questions. You're actually trying to convince yourself that you're wrong, because you'd rather really understand whether you're right or wrong. So again, this all maps directly to your brand because you're really trying to figure out, are you delivering the right brand promise, again, that the customer cares about. But it's going to be integral to your whole marketing strategy. And in having those discussions with customers, and I always suggest talk to at least 20 or 30. Now, a statistician will tell you that's not a statistically significant number. And it doesn't matter, because it's a hell of a lot more significant than one, right? So it's a really, really good idea. I guarantee you it'll put you outside your comfort zone for a lot of you. But if you go find 20 or 30 people who you believe are customers and talk to them and have these probing discussions about, am I right about this or not? And ask them, you're asking probing questions like, well, why is this an unmet need? What else have you tried to solve this problem? If you're not satisfied with what you have now, and you're not actively looking for other problems, or other solutions rather to that problem, then it doesn't sound like it's a very big problem, does it? So again, you're trying to ask in different ways to figure out, is this really something that's not met? It's really an opportunity, and you'll learn through that process again whether or not you do have a differentiated value add. So those are really key parts to that canvas and really key parts of your business plan. Then you're ready to ask that other big question, which is, how are you going to charge for this? Now we're moving to the quadrant that's like the lower right. And there are all kinds of ways to charge for a product. You know, if you're selling cannabis, there's a lot of other creative ways to sell it than just saying, hey, here's, a few grams for X dollars. Think about all the fun ways people sell food products. You can buy food products through a subscription. Like every month you get cool stuff in the mail. You can subscribe to a farmer, right, and get a basket of vegetables every week. There's a lot of creative ways to charge for something. So don't limit yourself to just the old-fashioned X dollars for a product sale. So it's worth thinking about. How do you think you should charge for this? And then you go back and talk to customers to see if that makes sense to them, right? Again, you're validating. Then the other fun one is, how much? You choose your method of charging. And the age-old question is, how much? And this is where people at companies big and small screw up so badly. I mean, you'll do things. I don't know how many entrepreneurs I've heard say, I'm going to undercut the competition by 20% so that I can get market share. And more often than not, that's not a very smart strategy. Now, there are things you need to look at. We'll talk about cost structure in a minute. Obviously, you're going to want to charge enough to cover your cost structure. But on the other, and you want to know what the competition is charging. But now think back to your unique value add. If there really is some differentiation in your product and or your service, you should be charging something different, right? Think about the airline business. Those people in first class and the people in the cattle car are all on the same plane. They all get there at the same time, and they pay a heck of a different price because it's a different experience that the airline is selling. Your product or service is different, or at least it should be. Let's hope it is. Let's hope that you understand how it is different. How much will people pay for that difference? That's a fair question to ask, and it may be different from the competition. Now, there are some really bad ways to figure out how much people will pay. Turns out, there's been a lot of research on this. One really bad way to find out how much people will pay is to ask them how much they will pay. That doesn't work. 20 questions doesn't work either. Well, would you pay 10? How about 15? Would you pay 12 and a half? Those are bad ways to find out. There is one much better way. I mean, frankly, there's no perfect way until you actually offer it on the market, and then is where you really find out. But there is one better way, and I love the name. It's the Van Westendorp Price Sensitivity Meter. Great name, huh? We've got a video on the website. And by the way, I think on that first page of 6 slides, somewhere on that there's the upper right-hand corner, the OTBC website. There's a link to our tools page and our videos page. On the videos page, we've got a ton of free videos there. One of them explains value pricing, which is the Van Westendorp Price Sensitivity Meter. Really quickly, what you do is you go talk to a bunch of customers, hopefully at least like 15 or 20, and you ask them 4 questions. After you describe your differentiated value add, right, they have to understand how you're different, because that's what you're going to do then, is find out if they care. You ask 4 questions. What would be too much to pay? You wouldn't even consider it. What would be too little to pay? It wouldn't make sense. You'd question it. You just wouldn't know. That wouldn't work. What would be getting expensive? But you'd think about it. And then what would be a bargain? So if you think about it, you're helping people cognitively triangulate, right? You never actually ask them what you should charge. You just are trying to figure out their inflection points. What's just way too much? What's, okay, we'd be painful, but I'd think about it. What's a bargain? It turns out you plot all that data in a particular way, and where some of these plots cross are particularly interesting prices to look at. But you could imagine, if you talk to 20 customers, you could imagine how useful that data is. You can say then, well, gee, if I go from $10 to $12, this many more people is going to think that just crossed the line of too expensive to even think about. That's actually useful data. So, again, it's a more useful way of figuring out pricing. So that's, again, we've got a video that explains all the detail. And all you need is Excel to do this. You don't need a stat map, which is another thing I like about the technique. So that's figuring out the revenue piece. Then we're going to flip over to the lower right or lower left side of the canvas and look at the cost. And on the cost side, the question is, okay, you write down what you believe. I mean, clearly this is critical, right? Are you going to be able to make money or not? How do you test your assumptions there? A really good way to test those assumptions is to go find somebody that's done a similar kind of business. And it doesn't necessarily have to be cannabis, right? It just has to be a similar structured business, like maybe a similar ag business of some sort. Because there are just processes that you need to understand. There are a lot of things, if you haven't done this before, whatever this is, whatever part of the value chain it is, you're probably going to forget stuff. And you probably have no clue how much some stuff really costs. And frankly, the best way to get educated is to go find somebody who has done something similar, who will tell you, no, that's way too low, that's way too low, that's way too high, and you'll get really useful feedback. So, again, really good way to, and it's a really good idea for obvious reasons to test those assumptions, because if you analyze your pricing, you'll find out how much people will pay, and if your cost structure says you just can't make money, it's time to, you have to fall back and punt and figure out how to change your model. Maybe somehow you got to up your value proposition so that they'll pay more. So that's getting the cost piece. Another piece, another segment there is the metrics, and this gets into, actually it's a couple things. On the one hand, what things should you really be watching in this business to make sure you're on track to be successful? From a sales point of view, there are sales metrics that are really important to watch. And sales is this interesting thing. There's always salespeople think in terms of a funnel. You do marketing, and that pours people into the top of the funnel. And then some of them are interested, but it's fewer people. And then some of them are really interested, and it's fewer people. And then some of them finally buy, and that's the bottom of the funnel. So you need to understand, and it's great to start with writing down what you think the model will be of how does your funnel work. And then early on, if you start measuring transitions, I did marketing, and then this % of the people that sort of clicked on the link on the website or whatever it is actually did something to show their interest. Okay, you then optimize that so that you keep optimizing each transition so that ultimately you get more money. Because that's how you get more customers, right, is pour more in or optimize the transitions in the stages. So at some point, you'll want to find some salesperson who can help you figure out what that looks like. Other metrics, of course, on the finance side, right? Obviously, really understanding, working with an accountant, making sure that you understand how the costs work in your business. It's really easy to ignore things that can come back and bite you, so clearly this is going to be important. And when Matt starts talking about asking people for money, you have to be able to show that you really understand that financial model of your business, or you won't get very far. That budget part is a really key part. By the way, one thing that you'll want to do is put together a budget and some financial forecasts. Score has a really good tool. They charge $40 for it. That's a very good tool for doing budgets for small businesses. And they got a guy who, actually the guy that wrote the package, has worked with a ton of small businesses. He knows all the nasty questions to ask. And you'd rather have him ask you those nasty questions before a banker does. So Score is actually a resource I refer even our tech companies to a lot. And the guy that wrote it actually spends Tuesday mornings out at the incubator in Beaverton, just with some Score office hours, and it's free. I don't know. Oh, really? Is it? Okay. Well, as a second alternative, on the other. Oh, yeah, they are federally funded. That could be a problem. Yeah. Well, so there are alternatives. On the OTBC, I think I have there the tools page on the OTBC website. There is a template. It's an Excel template that you fill in the blanks, and it puts out a cash flow statement, a balance sheet, and an income statement. And it's all projection based. I mean, you get the real thing out of QuickBooks, and it can do some projections too. But this is a tool designed for playing around with projections, which is a really good thing to do when you're an entrepreneur. And that one's just on the website, and there's nobody standing there stopping you from downloading it. So, but anyway, so yeah, figuring out your financial model, clearly critical. Figuring out your metrics, clearly critical. Okay, two things left: marketing and sales, and my favorite then, your unfair advantage. So marketing and sales, the thing I see so many people mess up at big companies and small in marketing is that they do what they did. This is what you see in corporate situations all the time. They just, you hire your marketing person, they do what they did at the last company. And that's usually not very strategic. My simple definition of strategic marketing is look at what the customers look at. Understand the way the customers think, and structure marketing programs that take that into account. It seems obvious, right? It's amazing how many companies don't do that. Good marketing starts with your customer. It shouldn't be a mystery of, gee, should we do a blog? Should we do Twitter? Should we go to this show? Should we do this? Should we do that? The question is, do your customers go there? If they don't, then don't go there. If you're, I'll keep picking on boomers since I am one. If you're marketing to boomers, I'm not really sure Twitter's the best venue you could use. Maybe not. Not even sure blogs are the best venue, although there are boomers that, do follow some blogs. That's a little more comfort. But anyway, it all starts with just understanding your customer. It goes all the way back to those discussions you had with customers to understand the need. It's a really good idea at the same time to say, hey, how do you find out about stuff like this? What kinds of things do you go to? What kinds of blogs do you read? Do you do Twitter? What do you follow? I mean, it comes from your customer. You don't have to dream these things up. If you ask your customer, they'll tell you. Same for the competition. You don't have to sneak around dark corners to figure out what the competition's doing. If you ask your customers, they're happy to tell you what they like and what they don't like about the competing products. So, again, a lot of useful data comes straight from your customers. Okay, so marketing and sales, again, both for the marketing, creating demand, and the sales, actually extracting money. Again, you'll learn a lot if you just listen to how your customers learn about stuff and how they want to be sold to. And you may want to change the way they get sold to. I mean, Amazon did that beautifully, right, when they taught everybody how to buy online. That can work. But if you're going to change the way somebody does something, there better be a compelling reason for it, because people don't change that easily. So that's marketing sales piece. Last but not least is the unfair advantage. What the heck is the unfair advantage? It's a really good thing to think about. We talked about your differentiated value add. How are you different from the competition? Really important thing to know and communicate in your messaging and branding, etc. But the challenge with your unique value add is that somebody can see your unique value add today and probably do a pretty good job of cloning it next week. So the interesting thing to ask too is, are there any advantages, any barriers to entry that you can create that give you an advantage? Now, people usually think about barriers to entry reactively. It's like these are things you must overcome. I always suggest entrepreneurs think about barriers to entry proactively. What barriers to entry can you build behind you so that the bad guys, right, don't catch up? It's a really good thing to think about. There are some things that are hard to clone, right? Like getting some guru in the market to say your product or solution is the best. Okay, that's a little bit harder to duplicate. And yeah, they can go try to find their own guru, but it's harder than just cloning your product feature. Maybe you have an awesome team, or maybe you do have, in the techie world, it would be like a patentable technology. Maybe you have some know-how that's actually pretty hard to duplicate, and you keep it secret. That can be a hard-to-duplicate advantage. Location, is a classic hard-to-duplicate advantage in a lot of retail businesses. So it's a good thing to think about. And again, obviously, will be an important thing to dial into your business plan. People who think about giving you money will really care about these things. What can you do to create barriers to entry and create this sort of unfair advantage for yourself? So those are the segments in a canvas. It's not absolutely everything that goes into the business plan, but it covers some really critical assumptions that have to go into your business plan. And the more work you do to get out there in the real world and either talk to customers and or talk to other people who've done a similar business for the cost thing, and talk to people who've sold this kind of thing in the marketing and sales thing, but also, again, listen to your customers. Everything that you can do to actually test those assumptions, you go through that process, you learn a ton. And you doesn't guarantee you'll be successful, but it raises the odds over what it would have been without all that homework. So that's a quick overview of the canvas. One of the other handouts I distributed, or Amy distributed for me, was one of the slide builds from our funding workshop, and it just gives you, let's see, actually I have it right here, don't I? I grab it. It is this one, this funny chart-looking thing, which this basically, for an early-stage company, talks about the most common sources of funding. My favorite is always the first one, spouse-based funding. Keep your spouse working. Hey, it is the most common funding technique in tech companies, I'll tell you that. Or keep your day job, right, and do this as a side project. The old standard savings, credit cards, second mortgages, friends and family. Really, those are the people most likely to give you money. Some investor that you don't know, especially given the interesting challenges in your field, but for any early stage investor or startup, investors are a tough sell. Until you've made some headway, and then they become easier. Banks, you see SBA and microloans, I put those way off to the right, because for the kind of startups I work with, a banker would never talk to them, because they're not going concerns. It's like these people are losing money because they're developing a product. But as soon as you have a going concern, then you can start talking to a banker. Crowdfunding is getting more and more interesting. There's obviously the traditional, but now you've got the community public offering. But beware with it. I think what we're seeing in these first batch of community public offering companies is the ones that make it are very similar to the ones that make it in traditional crowdfunding. It's the people that already had the community. I think it was the ice cream company in Eugene that's done pretty well in their initial community public offering. They already had a good supportive community. I think of community crowdfunding as being a great way to organize a friends and family round, but realistically, it's mainly going to be people who already know you, who are likely to write that check for up to $2,500, which is what that allows. So again, the good news is there are sources of funding that you can tap into when you're a really early stage company, but and I think Matt's going to give you the real world view of that, but it ain't easy. For sure. And with that, I guess, how ridiculously late are we? Can we ask for a question or two, or just go straight to Matt? Yeah. Yep, that does make this unique. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you much.